Kia ora, Kelly. Kelly Kahukiwa is joining us this evening, New Zealand time, talking to us about plant signals and having a conversation about his wondrous mahi. Kelly is someone that is very dear to Awhi World. We have known him since we arrived in Whangarei and have done at least a couple of projects. He's a maestro extraordinaire of many, many different things. And it is best that I allow him to share his magic with you directly because I would never be able to do it justice. Welcome, Kelly, for coming this evening and talking about your mahi. Please tell us a little bit about your wondrous being.
Kia ora, Maggie. Yeah, it's really great to see you again. It has been a little while, and I know that you've been out there looking after our ngahere, looking after our forest, and looking after yourself, I hope too. So thanks for bringing me on this talk again. I've had a few talks with you over time. I guess in relation to what you're talking about, which is around biosignaling, isn't it, really, inside of what we would call the ngahere. The way that I've been involved in that is I initially had curiosity about how we have a belief that there's an energy inside of the forest, which we call tane mahuta. It actually has a lot of different names, and it's the evolution of the forest canopy itself. Right from back in the beginning of time, really, when the heaven and earths were separated, and inside of there are a whole lot of, I guess, there's a breadcrumb trail for us of an interconnectivity that relates to sound and light, and it's through chants that have been handed down to us. It's through our waiata, our songs themselves. It's through our holistic healing modalities, which are really all mostly around forest types of medicine, and to tell of any indication in the forest, we don't look at trees as such as individuals. We look at them as part of the whole system. So therefore, what's running through that system, just like in a house, you'd have electricity, which powers the different lights and the different, I guess if you have a TV and you have a radio, whatever's running through your house, it's run by one source. And for us, that one source that runs through the forest really informs us of how we're going. So we're trying to find that in ways of using our bodies as instruments to be attuned to what that force is. And that force is called Modi. And when we have an indication of Modi inside of a whole system and how we're related to it and how we affect it and how we're affected by it, we're able to then live more meaningful lives as Māori, because we're then related back to the source of creation. And then that source of creation is our spiritual beliefs. Before Christianity came here, we had a really deep connection to everything through trying to tap into this force, this one system, Mauri and Wairua. So that's a kind of a basis of it, but I know I've just used words that people probably don't understand, so we can unpack those a little bit more. Anyway, is that an okay introduction?
It is. It's a fantastic introduction. So you yourself, Kelly, have a very interesting background in that you have a sound background in various different ways, traditional sound as well as kind of as a sound engineer. Well, you do a lot of different kinds of music and sound per se, right? And you've also worked in the cultural sphere. So you're kind of a cultural advisor, cultural consultant in different ways. You've had leadership and teaching roles. And you've also got this very interesting research or a kind of activist environmental role that you have intertwining amongst those, and also as a side hustle in a certain sense as well, sort of like your passion or your research. Can you say a little bit more about how you engage with and encounter this interconnectivity in those different ways within your own practice, those different elements of your practice?
Kia ora. It's if I actually go back to how I had my first encounters with realizing that I was a person who was affected by sound, I noticed that there were people around me who were like really good sound producers when I was younger, and they were, I guess I was more of a sound capturer. So it took me years before I even took up an instrument, because I was still captivated by what sound was actually doing to me, rather than having a need to reproduce sound itself. So for a long time, I've been a listener, and so long that even at school, my teachers were like, okay, if you're going to be in music class, which you've obviously got an interest in, you have to play an instrument. So for 2 years, I just said, no, I'm not playing an instrument. 2.5 years, actually. So I just, and that journey led me right back always to the source of where does sound come from. I'd think about things like okay, that's a tuba that, that guy over there is playing, or that girl over there is playing a French horn, but it looks a lot like our shells. And I started to like study things like sacred geometry to work out there's a geometric pattern that we actually have created things from, that are maybe music making, that come from something out of nature first and foremost. And that's obvious, everybody knows that. But if you actually think about that in a deep, deep way, to think that one day somebody picked up a seashell, started having a little play around with it, at what we call in Te Ao Māori, we call it tutuing around, just having a bit of a muck around with it, and eventually human imagination over time has created such wonderful instruments that we see in orchestras, like French horns, or these trombones or tubas or cornets, and all these kind of instruments that came from the spiral of the shell. Mm-hmm. And so inside of there, we have these shapes that are in the forest too. We have snails, sorry, not sea snails. We have Cody snails, and we have these sound producers also in the forest. We have these harakeke, which are flex snail shells that we use, and we make sound out of them too. That going back to the primordial source of sound, going back to its basic shapes and its divine intelligence through mathematics being expressed as music, that's always been a fascinating place for me to sit in. So as a music producer and a music capturer, I'm now going back to the basic source within our own culture. What do our people say about sound production? What do they say? And what they did say was, I te timatanga o te ao, kua waiatatia te ao ki te ao marama, which is, there's variations on that, but what it's saying is, in the start of all existence, the great creator sang the world into existence. Mm. Which aligns with things that are in Genesis, or they align with things that are in the Quran, about how the very first part of energy was the word and the vibration of that. So I always think that we can't ever think about stop thinking about our divine inheritance of sound, and how that itself shapes even the trees that we see behind us. There's a certain energetic signature that gives those trees its own real estate of where it is to grow into as well. The canopy knows it, so it allows space for it. It's incredible, and each of those have a different a sound that is emitted from them as well. So from a natural point of view, I don't need to know the exact frequency that they're emanating at, but I do want to know how it feels for my system, how I interact. So that's where reading the Modi is where I'm at right now.
Mm. And Kelly, for those who are watching who are not in New Zealand, one of the things that concerns us, and particularly I think in Te Tai Tokoro, the area that we're in, is kauri dieback and the sort of disease and pathogens that are occurring. And some of those diseases and pathogens, that's one at the moment, will increase necessarily with the changes that are happening as a result of climate change, for example. And there'll be less resilience in some plants, and certainly an increase in pathogens of different kinds. And that's one of the biggest worries that we have around climate change. The heat increase, particularly, or changes in temperature, changes in rainfall, will cause certain diseases to occur. And so in terms of that, I guess one of the things I'm interested in is there's a resonant sound or interconnectivity that happens in a healthy environment. Is there a resonant sound or an interconnectivity breakdown or change that happens when there's an unhealthy environment or a shift? How does climate change fit into the things you've spoken about so far, or some of the issues that we're seeing environmentally?
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. I think that how our people read it is that, so behind me you can see the Cody trees. There's a couple of versions of them there, and they are one of the trees that has been, let's say, impacted by this potential threat to the whole forest ecosystem. At the moment, it has decimated areas of the forest, but through human intervention, we haven't stopped it, but through our awareness, we've started to slow it down. And the way that we can look at the health of the forest itself is that through sound, Tāne mahuta is what we call the energy that runs through the trees, and we call that an atua. It's like a divine being, a divine intelligence. And the divine intelligence of the creator manifests itself as a forest in this particular case here. And so there's a sound that comes with it. And one of the creations of Tāne Mahuta was Tāne Hokohoka. And Tāne Hokohoka is actually the energy of the birds. The relationship between trees and birds is synonymous. So we don't see them as being that separate, whereas in science you've got all these classifications of the birds. These particular birds are related to the forest. So when their sound is absent, that's a health indicator of the forest. It's a natural health indicator of the forest, as the same as when the cicadas don't sing for very long in a season, or they come out really, really late. They're obviously indicators of the forest, and everybody around the world knows that. It's just how do we look at our own biophonic sound signatures and the lack, all the reduction in noise that comes through there. So we can tell Māori by birds that we could hear, say, 4 or 5 years ago, we may not be hearing them. One of the birds that is really important to us is the kereru, or up here in Northland, the kukupa, which is the wood pigeon. And the wood pigeon, you can more hear its flapping wings. It's got quite a heavy as it hovers through the ngahere, and the lack of that sound is an indicator that the Māori is down for us, because it helps to spread the seeds of a lot of the trees in the forest. So we have to be protective then of like the kereru or the kukupa's habitat as well in its environment, and we have to be mindful of this. So we use sound to try and call out to the birds first of all. So we try and understand their sound, and we use our instruments to have conversations with them, and we use it as a way of saying, hey, we're actually here like our ancestors were, and we are here to live in harmony in this forest here, and we'll come in with our sound, because the only sound that they usually hear is chainsaws, weed whackers, or things that they use to, like clean up the environment from our councils, which do a lot of work in there too, but that's the usual human impact that they have, and the birds and the forest here. So we use sound to try and what we call restore that balance.
It reminds me a little bit, so two things it reminds me of, or something that comes to mind, is we did a project in Manurewa once where we had a derelict tower, and what we did was we created a resonant structure within the tower using amplifying speakers, and then we recorded sounds of really happy things around Manurewa, and we connected put the sounds into the tower, so the tower was resonating sounds of happiness within itself as a kind of regenerative idea. And certainly within biosignals, the research we've been doing around sensors and code hasn't actually been with the plants itself. It's been the ecosystem around it. It's sensors that measure the soil or the chemicals in the soil, the humidity, etc. Because we're interested in that interconnectivity and how we can generate signals, but then feed the signals back in a way that amplifies. Particularly around plants that we've just grown or planted, like vibrant plants, if that makes sense. Is there kind of a system or an understanding where you take a kind of healthy environment or healthy sounds and then you feed back those healthy sounds in order for things to flourish? Is there something that is a concurrent or parallel universe in Te Ao Māori that does that?
Absolutely. So in Te Ao Warawara, which is way up north here in the North Island of New Zealand, just north of Pawarenga, there's a group up there of people, and Joanne Murray is one of the people who sort of leads a group of people who are Māori, I guess you call them Māori ecologists in a way, who look at forest health through sound and regenerating sound. So what we did is we made some recordings with another Māori musician called Marie Sheehan, and we realized that there's this healing frequency that actually applies to more than just humans, and it's outside of humans, and it's around, I think it's 528 hertz. So you can, I should get back to you on that one. Maybe I should have a look here quickly. But I'm pretty sure it was 528 hertz. And so I found instruments of mine, traditional Māori instruments, that were at the pitch of 528 hertz, and we recorded them together with some other healing frequencies, and they took the young people and they played those sounds back into the forest where it was ill. Daily practice, and they're going to be doing that for months, I think. So they have sound emission technology that's run on batteries, and they just take it into the part of the forest that needs healing. So with that, with the sound, along with some traditional Māori medicines that come from the plants, and Kahukiwa, which is our way of using my body right now to influence the environment around me through bringing out I guess you could call the highest parts of my being, channeling them into the highest words that I can think of healing, with the highest intention from my heart. That's called Kahukiwa. So putting all those together at the moment, they're mentoring rangatahi, younger people, who are teenagers, to go on and do that, to carry that work out at the moment on their forest, wherever they see forest health is diminished. And so the results of that will be back soon, but so far the results have been really great for the community with the connection to the forest, and that's where the forest has been lonely for us. It's been lonely for us. We're going back in numbers, young people, old people are, to do whatever we can, and that's a great start towards healing.
What a beautiful project. Did
that answer your question, Maggie? I know I'm answering all these around the edge of everything.
I think for me, one of the other questions I was going to ask you is bioSignals, the project that we're working with at the moment, which is funded by the British Council, primarily at British Council Philippines. One of the things we're doing is a kind of reconnaissance, or how do I put it, like some research into the possibility of sending signals into space. So we have an agency in the UK who, are doing some things, and we're looking at university, I should say, looking at the possibilities of space signals. How does that fit in a cultural context, Kelly? Like in terms of Māori culture, for example, is it appropriate to take plant signals and send it into space? What would be a reason for doing that that's useful, or would it be a tapu thing to do? I guess that's a question I'm interested in asking you.
Well, if we go back to the basics of our cosmology, and a time which we call Te Orokohanga, which is the start of creation altogether, how I said that at the beginning of time, the great creator sang the world into existence. What came from there was what we call atua, and some people have say the word gods, and that's okay, that word, but for us, what it really means is that the different partitions of the universe, and especially the one that we know, which is the Earth's biosphere, has been given different names to each of those realms. So the wind has the name of Tāwhiri Mātea, the forest has the name of Tāne Mahuta, the ocean has the name of Tangaroa, the realms of these atua energies. And those atua came from Ranginui, which is actually outside of the Earth's well, actually anything above the ground and then going all the way out to the outer atmosphere is a ranginui. So there's a relationship for us all the time. So if we were to say transmit some of the frequencies from Tāne Mahuta, all we're doing is amplifying them. We believe that those are happening all the time anyway, because we believe that our atua are always talking to their parents. So ranginui being the father and Papa Tuanuku being the mother. So really what it's amplifying is Papa Tuanuku's voice back to her husband, Rangi, which is the sky, and they got separated at a time. So we believe those communications are happening now, and the trees are like conduits for that communication constantly. So it's nothing out of the ordinary to emit those frequencies out. Just as long as you're not bringing back any freaky deakies from the from the communications you want to come and destroy our whole atmosphere. Yeah.
Point noted. Yes. And I guess at the moment, grounding it back to yourself, Kelly, what is your passion? Like, you're obviously doing a lot of different, doing a lot of very, very important work in terms of your cultural consulting and work. But in terms of your creative and artistic practice, which obviously that intersects with, where is your heart at the moment, and what do you see yourself doing next?
It's about making sure that, first and foremost, that the indigenous people of our land are reminded of our divine connection back to Tāne Mahuta as one of our atua, and that forest is essential for our grandchildren, the health of our grandchildren. And then beyond that, not just our Indigenous people who have become disconnected through the colonization process a while ago, is to remind them of this magic of this forest. So learning the different crafts and learning the different knowledges that are inside of there, to bring them back out to our people in a really simple way, to try and entice them to slowly come back into the forest and make it a normal part of their environment again. That's a passion of mine, but I like to do it through real simple ways, like just music making, storytelling, finding magic, finding little magical pockets that are in the ngahere that you can't find anywhere else, and bringing them back and highlighting them and telling people, kind of like if you went and saw a fantastic movie and you went and told everybody about it, and then everyone goes to that movie. I like to do that with the forest as well. So, and I like to do that with really, like I said, simple things, just with our traditional Māori instruments, with taking people into the forest to teach them, or to be even for me to be taught. I like to take people into the forest who can teach me a lot of stuff as well, and we just share different information. Yeah, and I haven't been in there for probably a good 3 or 4 months, like regularly, and I'm just going back in there now. I really like being in the time of autumn. It's autumn for us here in Aotearoa, and just the whole new, the mauri changes. There's a whole bunch of seeds, new seeds that are being dropped. It's a beautiful, another magical time to be in the forest. So I like that. And anything that keeps me in there, I'll stay in there. But I would like to say that there are 2 diseases at the moment that are impacting on some of our native species. And not just Phytophthora agathodicida, which is what we call the Cody dieback, which affected quite a few different species of trees, especially the Cody and the Tāne kaha. But there's another one that we have now, which is in one of the rusts that attack the myrtles, and we have quite a few of the myrtle species here. So that one there is coming through it's coming through the wind. So the other one of them came down through the roots. So I was studying water and studying the water table, and how water is an indicator of mauri and how water works inside of our ngahere system. And now I'm actually finding that I'm trying to work out how do we raise awareness. So these pollens from this dust is coming in through the wind, and it's impacting on our trees already here in Northland. And it's actually decimated forests down in the east coast of the North Island too. So very concerned about it. So it's about trying to raise awareness to people. So I think the more awareness we have, we can spot if these things are happening. We can let our authorities know with biosecurity actually how to where these things are happening too, instead of being helpless,
And I guess for those, there are many people watching who are in the kind of science, botany, research, technology space. So having that awareness, one of the reasons I invited you is to have some of the awareness of those things, because some of the research they're doing may be applicable in some way. And is there ways to develop sensors, for example, that measure pollen count or measure, different kinds of pathogens and things, which is something I'm quite interested in.
We're trying to attack the problem from different ways of thinking. So once Indigenous minds get involved, we think outside of the circle or the square or whatever it is. So at the moment, we think that these rusts actually exist through forests everywhere. There's rusts all over different trees, but it doesn't create an impact. But this particular rust, it's almost like the forest has its pH level is out. So in Venezuela, where this where this rust originated from, in its natural state, that rust is all over trees throughout the forest, and they're fine. They live. So there's something to do with the soil health, which has an immunity to that rust. So it's not a pest. It's actually it's a natural native rust in Venezuela. But for us, our forest health and imbalance, and it could be through such things as not having enough seabirds coming into the forest, and the way that their waste, their excrement produces, like the potassium or the phosphorus or whatever's in their particular droppings, that are actually essential for forest health. Therefore, what are we doing that's impacting our seabirds' relationship with the forest? We have a phrase in Te Ao Māori, it says, ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kāka, ka tangi hoki ahau, ti hei mauri ora. And it says the titi is the mutton bird. They live out at sea. And if the mutton bird is crying, ka tangi te titi, then it says ka tangi te kāka. The kāka is a really, really noisy parrot that we have that's in the inland in the forests. And it says, so therefore, if the seabird is crying and the forest bird is crying, then it says at the end, ka tangi hoki ahau, then I, the human, also cry. life proliferates. It's not just meaning cry. It means if I'm making a sound, it's because the birds at sea are still making a sound and the birds in the forest are still making a sound. Therefore, I can live. So if we reverse engineer that whakatauki, we have to look after the seabirds and we have to look after the forest birds. Otherwise, we will perish.
So as a final question, Kelly, do you feel hope around the environment? Do you feel that there is light or hope for us to change what's going on and to, for the interconnectivity to continue to thrive?
Yeah, I do. I really believe in the divine intelligence of all the parts of our ecosystem working together. And I don't think that humans, in our creation story, humans were unable to surpass the energetic influence of the forest, of the oceans, of the wind. So in our stories, the human has always been really battling with all of those, but never ever able to win. And that's where the hope is the hope is that our ancestors have always seen this eternal struggle that humans have against the ecosystem itself, trying to subjugate it for different types of food or energy. We've always been in this pursuit of attainment throughout all these realms, and we've never ever conquered them. So my hope is that through our stories, they're saying, don't even bother trying to conquer it. You're wasting your time. The environment will always be a master to you. And through that, I believe that the destruction that we have will always be large for us. The destruction we have is our own. It's the same thing they have, don't go up the river and go to the toilet up there, because if you're camping downriver, it's always going to come back to you. You're basically just eating your own excrement, which is what we're good at, So I have hope for the environment. I don't have hope for billions of humans surviving the environment, though.
And whether that's a good or bad thing, I think that's open to judgment. I might agree with you on that point.
Yeah, maybe.
Is there anything I haven't asked that you feel that you want to share that is in your heart, or you notice that comes to you that feels important to say?
No, but I'd love to be in touch with people who are of a similar mindset, that especially around. So we have a really beautiful thing with Western science. We call it Western science, but actually a lot of the science that we call Western science has come from Eastern science a lot too. So I'll just say that the scientific framework of reductionist, a reductionist interrogation into how things work. I would like to speak to people too who work in the space where they come from, their tribal narratives as well, holding on to those through time and how they've actually helped to keep ecosystems alive. The other spaces are really interested in the intersection between science and the indigenous knowledge space. Where have those two created a relationship with? I love that space there. We call that Te Puaho Te Ako. It's like where in an estuary, you have the mixture between salt water and fresh water blending in, and the beings that are in there are kind of like sometimes very uncomfortable because the saltwater ones have accidentally been thrown into the freshwater area. And it's a bit of a mixture of the salt and the fresh water, and vice versa. The freshwater ones have also been thrown into this environment, and where it's a bit saltier. So I kind of like to exist in that space where I'm a bit uncomfortable. There are other people being uncomfortable with surviving in that space. So anyone else who's in the estuary there, get in touch. I'm keen.
Cool. And I think what I'll do is I'll put your email address on the thing that I post, that so people can contact you, or we can find a way to put the most appropriate contact details for you, Kelly, so people can do that directly. Yeah,
especially if anyone has any solutions around what we call the myrtle rust that's here, and it's really affecting some of our native species. We have some wonderful experts here in Aotearoa, but who knows, there may be someone out there who has a piece of the puzzle that we haven't thought of yet. For instance, just thinking outside the square, the rusts themselves are the same colour as pollen. Perhaps there's a certain bee in the world that actually will come and uplift rusts just the same as they take pollen. Who knows? And it might be actually an insect that cleans up those rusts in forests that we don't have here yet. So who knows? Someone might have another solution that's a bit out of the box,
Yeah, well, I hope there is a solution. Kelly, thank you very, very much for contributing your knowledge. It's always a privilege to talk to you. And I think one of the things that I always find when I talk to you is that it feels like it's talking to somebody who's in a similar home. Like I think we have often talk and we come from I hear that and I feel happy in my heart that there's another person working in a deeply spiritual place related to the environment and doing good things in the world. And so it makes my moldy sing whenever I hear you talk. So thank you for doing that again. I always love talking to you and hearing from you.
Thanks, Maggie. That was cool. Nice to talk to you too. And I wish I had time to ask you some questions about what you're doing, because it's been a while and I know you're always doing something magical out there too. And you've inspired me a few times to think about how I changed my practice too. So I really appreciate that connection.